Imagine arriving to marry someone and realizing you've been abandoned. No home, no future, no way back. She stood alone at the station, unaware that a stranger was about to change her life forever. The wind moved slowly across the empty plains, carrying dust and silence, as if the world itself had forgotten this place. The small wooden station stood alone, its paint faded and its edges worn. By years of sun and storms, no voices, no movement, no life, except one figure standing. Still as though time had wrapped itself around her, Ilara Whitfield clutched the small leather bag that held everything she owned, her fingers tight, her knuckles pale, her eyes searching the endless horizon that offered no answers. She had arrived hours ago, maybe more. She had stopped counting when hope began to feel heavier than fear. She had imagined this moment so many times during the long journey, across states, across dreams, across promises, written in ink that now felt fragile. She had pictured a man waiting for her, a man who had written kind words, a man who had signed his letters with a steady hand and a hopeful heart. Gideon Hale, the name echoed in her mind like a distant bell. Something real, yet unreachable, something she had trusted without ever seeing his face. She had believed in those letters, the way a drowning soul believes in land. But the station was empty. No horse, no wagon, no man, only the sound of wind brushing against broken wood and the occasional creak of a loose board. Somewhere in the structure behind her, her breath trembled though she tried to steady it. She told herself he might be late. She told herself something had delayed him. She told herself many things, but each thought felt weaker than the last. The sun had moved across the sky, without mercy climbing and now beginning its slow descent, painting the world in tired gold. A small memory surfaced uninvited, her mother's voice soft yet firm, telling her that trust was a dangerous thing to give away to strangers. But Ilara had not seen it as danger. She had seen it as a chance, a doorway out of a life that had grown too narrow, too quiet, too empty. She had wanted more, and Gideon had promised more. Yet here she stood alone. A flicker of doubt crept in, not loud, not sudden, but slow, like a shadow stretching across her thoughts. What if the letters had been lies? What if the promises had been nothing more than words sent into the void without meaning? Her chest tightened. She looked down at the letter she still carried, folded carefully, its edges worn from being read too many times. The ink slightly faded, but still clear. He had written that he would be there. He had written that he would recognize her. He had written that she would never be alone again. The wind answered her silence with another empty gust, and somewhere deep inside her, something fragile began to crack. Time passed in a way that felt both endless and fleeting, the kind of time that stretches when you are waiting for something that may never come. Ilara sat on the edge of the wooden platform, her bag resting beside her, her posture no longer stiff with expectation, but softened by exhaustion. Her eyes still watched the distance, but now there was hesitation in them, as though she feared what she might or might not see. A distant sound reached her, faint at first, almost imagined. Hoofbeats. She straightened quickly, her heart leaping before her mind could catch. Hope surged sudden and sharp, her fingers gripping the edge of the platform as she stood. The sound grew clearer, steady, deliberate. Someone was coming. Her breath caught as she stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the approaching figure, a silhouette against the fading light, a rider moving across the land with quiet purpose. This must be him. It had to be. The rider slowed as he neared the station, the horse stepping with calm strength, its coat dark, its movements controlled. The man sat tall in the saddle, his presence firm yet unhurried. He did not wave, he did not call out, he simply approached. Ilara felt a strange unease slip into her hope, something about the silence, something about the way he carried himself. When he finally stopped a few paces away, she saw his face, and she knew this was not Gideon Hale. The realization struck her like cold water, sharp and immediate. Her hope faltered, but did not fully die, perhaps. She thought perhaps this man had come on Gideon's behalf. She took a cautious step forward, her voice soft, uncertain. "Are you Mr. Hale?" The man studied her for a moment, his eyes steady. his expression unreadable, before he shook his head slowly. No. The single word settled heavily between them. Ilara felt her chest tighten again, the fragile crack inside her widening. She forced herself to speak again. Did he send you? Another pause. The wind moved between them, carrying dust and unspoken thoughts. No. The answer came just as steady, just as final. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world seemed to hold its breath around them. Then the man dismounted his boots, touching the ground with quiet certainty. He removed his hat, running a hand through hair darkened by sun and travel. You should not be here alone, he said, his voice calm, but carrying a weight that made her listen. Ilara lifted her chin, though her hands trembled slightly. I was told someone would meet me. He watched her carefully, as if measuring something unseen. And they did not come. It was not a question. She shook her head slowly. No. Silence stretched again, but this time it felt different, not empty, but filled with something unspoken, something building. The man glanced at the horizon, then back at her. Night is coming, he said simply. The words carried a quiet warning. Ilara felt a flicker of fear now, not just from being alone, but from the realization that she truly was alone in a place that offered no safety, no certainty, except perhaps for the stranger standing before her. The sky deepened into shades of amber and shadow, the last light of day slipping away as the vast land prepared to surrender to night. Ilara stood uncertain, her thoughts tangled between fear and instinct. Every lesson she had ever been taught urged caution, yet every moment she remained alone increased the danger. She could not name, but could feel pressing closer. The stranger secured his horse with practiced ease, his movements efficient. As though he had done this countless times before, he did not rush, he did not hesitate. There was a steadiness about him, something grounded, something real. He turned back to her, his gaze softer now, though still guarded. What is your name? The question felt simple yet heavy. Ilara Whitfield, she replied after a moment. He nodded once, as if committing it to memory. I am Rowan Cross. The name meant nothing to her, yet somehow it felt more solid than the one she had been waiting for. Rowan glanced toward the empty tracks, then back at her. There is no one else coming tonight? The certainty in his voice left little room for doubt. Ilara swallowed the last fragments of hope that had lingered painfully within. She looked down at the worn letter in her hand, then slowly folded it once more. The dream she had carried across. Miles and days seemed to dissolve quietly into the gathering darkness. I can manage, she said, though the words lacked strength. Rowan studied her again this time, not with distance, but with something closer to concern. No, you cannot. There was no harshness in his tone, only truth. The wind picked up slightly colder now, brushing against them, like a reminder that the world did not pause for broken expectations. There is a town a few miles west. Rowan continued, small but safer than this place. You can come with me. Ilara hesitated, every part of her aware of the risk of trusting another stranger, yet what choice did she truly have? Stay here alone with nothing but uncertainty, or go with a man she did not know into a night she could not predict? Her heart pounded as she weighed the options, but deep down, she already understood the answer. Survival often demanded trust, even when trust felt like stepping into darkness. She looked up at him, meeting his gaze for the first time without hesitation. All right. The word felt both heavy and freeing. Rowan gave a small nod, as if he had expected nothing less. He moved to help her onto the horse, his actions respectful, measured, never overstepping, yet firm enough to guide her when she faltered slightly. As she settled into place, she cast one last glance at the empty station, the place where hope had waited and faded. For a brief moment she felt a sting of loss, not just for the man who had not come, but for the version of herself who had believed so completely. Then Rowan mounted behind her, steady and sure, the horse shifting beneath them. Before beginning its slow journey into the darkening land, the station disappeared behind them, swallowed by distance and shadow. And though Ilara did not know it yet, the path ahead would not lead her to the life she had imagined, but to something far more real, and far more dangerous, and perhaps far more powerful. The night stretched wide and endless, the stars scattered across the sky. Like distant fires, watching silently as Rowan Cross guided the horse. Along a narrow trail that cut through the open land, the rhythm of hooves steady grounding almost hypnotic, Ilara Whitfield sat in front of him, her hands lightly gripping the saddle, her body tense at first but slowly easing as the cold air brushed against her face and carried away the weight of the station behind her. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The silence was not empty. It was filled with thoughts, questions, fears that neither yet chose to voice. Ilara could feel the presence of Rowan, behind her steady, unshaken. As though the darkness itself held no threat to him, there was something strange about that something that made her both uneasy and reassured at the same time. Finally, she found her voice soft against the quiet. "Why did you stop?" Rowan did not answer immediately, his gaze fixed ahead, as though measuring the land even in the dark. "I saw the train leave," he said after a moment, "and I saw you still standing there." Ilara swallowed. "Most would have kept riding." He gave a slight shift of his shoulders. "Most are not me." There was no pride in the words, only fact. She let that settle. A different question pressed forward, one she had been avoiding. "Do you know him?" "Gideon Hale?" Rowan exhaled slowly, a sound almost lost to the wind. "I have heard the name." The answer was careful, not dismissive, but not comforting either. Ilara felt the fragile thread of her past tighten again. "Is he real?" This time Rowan did not hesitate. "Yes." Relief flickered quickly, but it was short-lived. "But not the man you were promised," he added. The words landed heavy. Ilara felt her breath falter. "What do you mean?" Rowan guided the horse around a bend, the faint outline of distant hills, beginning to appear against the night. "Men like him write letters," he said quietly. "They sell dreams to those who have none left to hold on to." Ilara shook her head instinctively. "No, you are wrong. He wrote to me for months." Rowan did not argue, he simply spoke. "That is how they do it." Silence followed, but this time it was sharp. Ilara felt something inside. To resist something stubborn, something unwilling to let go of what she had believed. Yet another part of her, the quieter, deeper part, recognized the truth she had been trying not to see. The empty station, the absence, the silence. Her fingers tightened slightly. "Why are you telling me this?" Rowan answered without hesitation. "Because you deserve to know before the world shows you in a harsher way." The honesty in his voice cut deeper than any lie could have. Ilara turned her gaze forward again. The stars no longer distant lights, but cold witnesses to a truth she could not escape. The town appeared slowly on the horizon, a cluster of dim lights flickering against the dark, like fragile promises, barely holding their ground against the vast emptiness. Rowan slowed the horse as they approached the edge of it. Wooden buildings lined a single main road, their shapes rough, their presence quiet at this hour. Only a few lanterns burned, casting soft pools of light onto the dirt below. Ilara felt a strange mix of relief and unease. This place was not the future she had imagined, yet it was something solid, something real. Rowan brought the horse to a stop near a modest building with a worn sign hanging loosely above the door. "You can stay here tonight," he said. Ilara slid down carefully, her legs slightly unsteady after the long ride. She looked at the building, then back at him. "What is this place?" "A boarding house." Simple answer, simple truth. She hesitated again. "And you?" Rowan rested a hand on the saddle, his gaze calm. "I will make sure you are settled." There was no expectation in his voice, no demand, only quiet intention. Ilara nodded slowly. Inside, the air was warmer, filled with the faint scent of wood and thyme. A woman behind the counter looked up, her expression curious but not unkind. Rowan spoke briefly to her, his tone low, steady. Arrangements were made quickly, a room, a bed, a temporary refuge. Ilara stood near the stairs, unsure of what to say or what to feel. Everything had changed so quickly that her thoughts struggled to keep pace. Rowan turned to leave, but paused when she spoke. "Wait." The word came softer than she intended. He looked back at her. "Thank you." It was simple but real. Rowan gave a small nod. "Get some rest," he said. Ilara watched him for a moment longer, as if trying to understand something. she could not yet name. Then he stepped outside, disappearing into the night once more. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step carrying the weight of the day. The room she entered was small but clean, a single bed, a window, a quiet space that felt both foreign and safe. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands resting in her lap. For the first time since arriving, she allowed herself to feel everything. The disappointment, the fear, the loss. Tears came quietly, not dramatic, not overwhelming, just steady, honest. She had crossed miles for a promise that had vanished. And yet, she was still here. Still standing, still breathing. The realization settled gently. Perhaps that meant something. Morning arrived softly, the first light, slipping through the window and brushing against Ilara's face, waking her from a restless sleep that had been filled with fragments of memory and unanswered questions. For a moment she did not move. Then reality returned. The station, the absence. Rowan. She sat up slowly, the room now clearer in the daylight. Less uncertain but no less unfamiliar. After gathering herself, she stepped outside, the town already beginning to stir. Quiet voices, distant movement, life continuing as it always did, regardless of who arrived or who was left behind. Her eyes searched almost without thought, and found him. Rowan stood near the far end of the road, speaking with another man, his posture relaxed but alert, as though he carried awareness like a second nature. Ilara approached slowly, unsure. Why she felt drawn to him, perhaps? Because he was the only thread connecting her to what came next. He noticed her before she spoke, turning slightly, his expression unchanged but not unwelcoming. "You slept." It was a statement, not a question. "A little," she replied. Rowan nodded once. "Good." She hesitated, then spoke the question that had formed during the quiet hours of the night. "What happens now?" Rowan looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing more than just her words. "That depends on you," he said. Ilara frowned slightly. "I have nothing here. No place. No plan." The admission felt strange but freeing. Rowan crossed his arms lightly. "Then you decide what comes next, not what was promised to you." The words settled differently than before, not harsh, not cold, but grounding. Ilara looked around the town, the people, the movement, the ordinary life that continued without knowing her story. For the first time she realized something important. Her future was no longer tied to a letter, or a name, or a promise made by someone who never came. It was hers. The thought was both terrifying and powerful. Rowan stepped closer, not too close, just enough. "If you stay," he said, "you will need work, a place to belong, something to build." Ilara met his gaze. "And if I leave?" A faint pause. "Then you face the same choice somewhere else." A small breath escaped her, almost a laugh, but not quite. "So there is no easy path." Rowan shook his head slightly. "No." Ilara stood there, feeling the weight of everything she had lost, and everything she could still become. The fear remained, but it no longer controlled her the way it had before. She straightened just slightly. "I will stay." The words felt firm, real. Rowan studied her for a moment longer, then gave a single nod. "All right." It was not approval, not surprise, just acceptance. And in that simple exchange, something shifted. Not a grand moment, not a dramatic change, but something quieter, stronger. A beginning. Ilara glanced once more at the road that led out of town, the direction she had come from, the place where her old life had ended. Then she turned away from it completely, towards something unknown, towards something unpromised, towards something she would build with her own hands. And as Rowan walked beside her, not leading, not following, but simply there, she realized she was no longer waiting. She was moving, and that made all the difference.